Cameras hadn't seen anything like it in 30 years. When the palace doors opened that evening, revealing a figure that seemed to step directly from the pages of royal history, the world collectively held its breath. The tiara that crowned her head hadn't been worn since the 90s, its diamonds catching the light like captured stars, each facet telling a story of tradition, resilience, and an extraordinary comeback that no one saw coming. This wasn't just another royal appearance. This was the moment when Catherine, Princess of Wales, reminded the world why the monarchy still matters, why some symbols transcend time, and how a single piece of jewelry could carry the weight of a nation's hopes. The tiara she wore that night had witnessed coronations, survived world wars, and now it would witness something equally historic, the triumphant return of a princess who had faced her darkest hour and emerged more radiant than ever. What followed would be talked about for generations, photographed from every angle, and remembered as the night when royalty reclaimed its magic in a world that had almost forgotten how to believe in fairy tales. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Adelaide Cottage, casting long shadows across the breakfast table where Catherine sat with her children. It had been 8 months since her diagnosis. 8 months since the world learned that the Princess of Wales was fighting a battle that millions of people around the globe understood all too well. Cancer had a way of making everyone equal, regardless of titles or tiaras. Prince George, now 11, carefully buttered his toast, while Princess Charlotte, 9, chattered about her upcoming school project on medieval castles. 6-year-old Prince Louis was more interested in seeing how high he could stack his cereal pieces before they toppled over. For a moment, watching her children in their comfortable routine, Catherine could almost forget about the weight of expectation that had been lifted from her shoulders when she stepped back from public duties. William entered the kitchen, already dressed in his suit for the day's engagements. He paused behind Catherine's chair, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. The gesture was small, but it spoke volumes about the partnership that had sustained them through the most challenging period of their marriage. When Catherine had first felt unwell, neither of them had imagined it would lead to months of treatment, cancelled engagements, and a level of privacy the royal family rarely enjoyed. The children's school called, William said softly. They wanted to know if you'd be able to attend the autumn fair next month. It was a simple question but loaded with meaning. Would she be ready? Would her strength have returned? Would the woman who had once commanded rooms full of world leaders feel confident enough to navigate a school playground again? Catherine smiled, though uncertainty flickered in her eyes. I'd like to try, she said. It was the same phrase she'd been using for weeks now, taking each day as it came, building back her stamina and confidence in increments that would have seemed impossibly small to her former self. The princess, who had once thought nothing of a full day of engagements, now celebrated small victories. Last week, she had managed a 2-hour visit to her parents' house without needing to rest. 3 days ago, she had taken the children to their tennis lessons and stayed to watch the entire session. These moments might not make headlines, but they were precious steps on a journey back to herself. In her private study, surrounded by get-well cards from around the world, Catherine often reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. The room was filled with flowers from well-wishers, artwork from children in hospitals, and letters from cancer survivors who had found hope in her openness about her diagnosis. She had never intended to become a symbol of resilience. But somehow, by simply being honest about her struggle, she had given others permission to acknowledge their own. The royal household had adapted to this new rhythm. Engagements were scheduled tentatively, with the understanding that they might need to be postponed. The press, usually hungry for every detail of royal life, had shown an unexpected restraint, perhaps recognizing that some battles were more important than photo opportunities. Even the most persistent royal photographers had stepped back, allowing the family a cocoon of privacy that had been both healing and necessary. Catherine's lady-in-waiting Amanda had become more than just a professional assistant during these months. She had been a confidant, a scheduler of medical appointments disguised as official duties, and sometimes simply a friend who understood that even princesses needed someone to talk to when the weight of public expectation felt overwhelming. The palace has been receiving quite a few invitations, Amanda mentioned during one of their afternoon planning sessions. The National Gallery wants to know if you'd consider the new exhibition opening. The Children's Hospital is hoping you might attend their fundraising gala. And there's been a formal request from the State Visit Committee. Each invitation represented a choice. Catherine could feel the pull of her old life, the satisfaction of meaningful work, the energy that came from connecting with people who were making a difference. But she also felt the vulnerability that her illness had exposed, the knowledge that her body had limits she had never acknowledged before. 6 and a 15-year-old. Her mother, Carol Middleton, had been a constant presence during the recovery, bringing a practical warmth that complemented William's protective concern.
"You don't have to prove anything to anyone,"
Carol had said just last week, but don't forget who you are either. The world has been waiting for you, Catherine. When you're ready, they'll still be there. The conversation that would change everything came on a Tuesday evening in late September. William found Catherine in the garden watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. She had been stronger lately, more like herself, though still careful not to overcommit to anything too demanding. "I had an interesting call today," William said, settling beside her on the garden bench. "From the King's private secretary. There's going to be a state dinner next month for the South African president. Nothing too elaborate, but significant enough that it needs the full family present." Catherine felt her pulse quicken slightly. State dinners were among the most formal of royal occasions, requiring hours of preparation, perfect protocol, and the kind of stamina she wasn't sure she had rebuilt yet. But they were also magnificent displays of British diplomacy and tradition, events where she had always felt the weight and privilege of her role most keenly. "What did you tell them?" she asked. "That I'd discuss it with you. No pressure, Catherine." "If you're not ready, Charles will understand completely. But if you are," William paused, studying her profile in the fading light. "It might be the perfect way to let people know you're back." That night, Catherine stood in front of her dressing room mirror, studying her reflection with new eyes. The woman looking back at her had been changed by her experience, marked by a vulnerability that hadn't been there before, but also strengthened in ways that surprised her. She thought about the tiara vault deep within Buckingham Palace, where generations of royal jewels waited for moments significant enough to deserve their presence. The idea came to her gradually, like dawn breaking slowly over the horizon. If she was going to return to public life, if she was going to step back into the role that had defined her for more than a decade, she wanted to do it in a way that honored both where she had been and where she was going. She wanted to choose a piece that would tell a story not just of royal tradition, but of renewal, resilience, and the quiet strength that comes from surviving something that could have broken you. She picked up her phone and dialed Amanda's number. "I need you to contact the crown jeweler," she said, her voice steady with a new kind of determination. "I want to discuss the possibility of wearing the Cambridge Lover's Knot tiara to the state dinner. I know it hasn't been worn in decades, but I think it's time." The silence on the other end of the line lasted just long enough for Catherine to wonder if she had made a mistake. Then Amanda's voice came through, warm with understanding and excitement. "I think that's a brilliant idea, Your Royal Highness. Absolutely brilliant." As Catherine ended the call, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the familiar flutter of anticipation that came before a major royal event. But this time it was different. This time, she wasn't just preparing to fulfill a duty, she was preparing to reclaim herself, to step back into the light after her long journey through the shadows, wearing a crown that would announce to the world that the Princess of Wales was not just surviving, but ready to shine again. The crown jeweler arrived at Kensington Palace on a crisp October morning, carrying with him a burgundy velvet case that seemed almost too ordinary for its extraordinary contents. Mark Appleby had served the royal family for nearly 2 decades, but he had never been asked to retrieve a piece with quite so much history and emotion attached to it. The Cambridge Lover's Knot tiara hadn't been worn since Princess Diana's last public appearance, wearing it in 1996, and its emergence from the palace vaults had required approval from the highest levels of the royal household. Catherine met him in the green drawing room, a space that had witnessed countless private moments in royal history. The morning light streaming through the windows seemed appropriate for what felt like both an ending and a beginning. She looked healthier than she had in months, though Appleby noticed she moved with the careful deliberation of someone still rebuilding their strength. "Your Royal Highness," he said, bowing slightly before placing the case on the mahogany table between them. "I must say it's been quite something preparing this piece. It hasn't been out of storage for so long that we've had to completely check every setting, every pearl, every diamond." As he opened the case, Catherine drew in a sharp breath. Even in the relative dimness of its velvet nest, the tiara seemed to capture and magnify every bit of available light. 19 Baroque pearl drops hung from diamond arches, creating a design that was both delicate and commanding. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Each pearl perfectly matched, each diamond cut to maximize its brilliance. The whole piece balanced so precisely that despite its substantial presence, it would sit lightly on the wearer's head. "May I?" Catherine asked, reaching toward the tiara with hands that trembled slightly. Whether from emotion or residual weakness from her treatment, Appleby couldn't tell, but he stepped forward immediately to assist. "Please allow me," he said gently. "It's quite heavy, actually. Nearly 2 pounds. Princess Diana used to joke that it gave her headaches, but she loved how it photographed. The mention of Diana hung in the air between them.
Catherine had grown more comfortable over the years with the inevitable comparisons to her late mother-in-law, but wearing Diana's tiara felt like stepping into a story that was both deeply personal and utterly public. Every photograph of Diana wearing this piece had been analyzed, celebrated, and remembered.
Now Catherine would add her own chapter to its history. As Appleby carefully lifted the tiara from its case, Catherine caught sight of a small engraving inside the band that she had never noticed in photographs.
"What does that say?" she asked, leaning closer. "With love, from Victoria, 1914.
He read. Queen Mary commissioned this piece as a gift for herself, but it was based on a tiara owned by her grandmother, the Duchess of Cambridge. The history goes back generations, Your Royal Highness.
You'll be wearing something that has witnessed over a century of royal history." The weight of that history felt almost physical as Appleby positioned the tiara on Catherine's head.
She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the cool metal against her scalp, the gentle pressure of the headband, the way the pearls moved slightly with her breathing. When she opened her eyes and looked in the mirror Appleby held for her, she hardly recognized herself. The woman in the reflection looked like a queen from a storybook, transformed by the combination of diamonds and history into something almost otherworldly. But more than that, she looked strong. The tiara didn't diminish her or make her appear fragile. Instead, it seemed to amplify something regal and powerful that had been growing quietly inside her during the months of her recovery. "It's perfect," she whispered, then louder, with more confidence. "It's absolutely perfect." Over the following weeks, the preparations for the state dinner took on an intensity that Catherine had almost forgotten. Her private secretary worked with the palace protocol office to ensure every detail would be flawless. The menu was planned to showcase British cuisine at its finest. The floral arrangements were designed to complement the formal dining room's historic paintings, and the guest list represented the most important figures in British-South African relations. But beyond the logistics, Catherine found herself preparing in a more personal way. She began taking longer walks around the palace gardens, rebuilding the stamina that formal events demanded. She practiced her posture while wearing the tiara, learning to move gracefully under its weight.
Most importantly, she spent time thinking about what this appearance would mean, not just to her but to the people who had followed her journey. The palace communications team briefed her on the likely media response.
"This will be significant coverage," warned Sir Clive Alderton, the King's principal private secretary. "The combination of your return to major duties and wearing Princess Diana's tiara will generate enormous interest. We need to be prepared for that level of attention." Catherine nodded, understanding the implications. Every detail would be scrutinized: her appearance, her demeanor, her interactions with other guests. The press would be looking for signs of fatigue, moments of vulnerability, evidence of whether she was truly ready for the demands of royal life again. But she also knew they would be looking for signs of strength, resilience, and the kind of grace under pressure that had always been her hallmark.
A week before the dinner, Catherine had a private meeting with King Charles.
Their relationship had deepened considerably during her illness, as the king had shown a paternal concern that went far beyond mere royal protocol. He had called regularly during her treatment, had adjusted his own schedule to accommodate her recovery, and had made it clear that her health took priority over any official duties. "Are you quite certain about this, Catherine?" "There's no shame in waiting a bit longer. The public would understand completely." Catherine appreciated his concern, but she felt ready in a way she hadn't for months. "I think I need to do this, Charles, not just for the public or for the institution, but for myself. I need to know that I can still be the princess I was before, that cancer didn't take that away from me." The king studied her carefully, seeing not just his daughter-in-law, but a woman who had been tested in the most fundamental way and had emerged with her spirit intact. "Then we'll make sure it's an evening worthy of you," he said simply. 3 days before the event, Catherine had her final fitting with the palace seamstress. The gown she had chosen was a deep sapphire blue, cut in a classic silhouette that would photograph beautifully against the tiara's diamonds and pearls. The color was significant. It was similar to the engagement ring she wore every day, another piece that had once belonged to Diana, creating a visual connection that would not be lost on observers. As she stood in the fitting room, surrounded by mirrors and bathed in the soft light that made the tiara sparkle like captured starlight, Catherine felt a profound sense of readiness. The woman in the reflection was not the same person who had sat in that breakfast room months earlier, uncertain about attending a school fair. This woman had been through darkness and had chosen to emerge into the light, wearing a crown. The night before the dinner, as Catherine prepared for bed, she found William standing in their dressing room, looking at the tiara where it rested in its special case. The security arrangements required it to stay in their private apartments until the evening of the event, and its presence seemed to fill the room with anticipation. "Any second thoughts?" he asked, though he could see from her expression that there weren't. "None," Catherine replied firmly. "Tomorrow night I want every person who has been worried about me, everyone who has sent letters and flowers and prayers, to see that their princess is back. Not unchanged. I'll never be exactly who I was before, but stronger somehow. More grateful, more aware of what really matters." William nodded, understanding completely. He had watched her fight her way back to this moment, had seen the determination that had carried her through the darkest days of her treatment, had witnessed the quiet courage that had sustained her when she didn't know if she would ever feel strong enough to wear a tiara again. "Diana would be proud," he said simply, and Catherine felt the truth of those words settle around her like a blessing. Tomorrow would bring cameras and crowds, protocol and pressure, but tonight there was just a princess and her tiara, ready to remind the world that some things are too precious to lose, too beautiful to dim, and too important to let go without a fight. The evening of November 15th arrived with the crisp clarity that only autumn in London could provide. Inside Buckingham Palace, the state dining room had been transformed into something approaching magical. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over polished mahogany, while arrangements of white roses and chrysanthemums filled the air with subtle fragrance. The table, set for 80 guests, gleamed with the finest china and silver, each place setting precisely positioned according to centuries of royal protocol. In her private apartments, Catherine sat perfectly still as her hairdresser made the final adjustments to ensure the Cambridge lover's knot tiara sat flawlessly. The sapphire gown she had chosen seemed to shimmer in the lamplight, its silk fabric moving like water as she breathed. Around her neck she wore a diamond necklace that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth, its stones echoing the brilliance of the tiara above. "You look absolutely radiant, Your Royal Highness," whispered her lady-in-waiting, Amanda, as she handed Catherine her evening gloves. But Catherine barely heard the compliment. She was focused inward, drawing on reserves of strength she had spent months rebuilding, preparing herself not just for an evening of diplomacy, but for the moment when she would step back into the full glare of public attention. At precisely 7:15, Catherine made her way to the palace's private lift that would take her to the ground floor. William was already waiting, resplendent in his evening tailcoat and military decorations, but his eyes were only for her. The man who had held her hand through chemotherapy treatments, who had fielded worried calls from their children, who had seen her at her most vulnerable, now watched as she transformed back into the princess the world remembered. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. Catherine took a deep breath, feeling the familiar weight of the tiara, the whisper of silk against her skin, the solid presence of William beside her. "I've been ready for months," she said, and meant it completely. The grand hall was already filled with guests when they arrived. Diplomats, government ministers, business leaders, and dignitaries from both Britain and South Africa. The conversation, which had been animated and cheerful, seemed to pause for just a moment as Catherine entered. Then, like a wave spreading across the room, she could feel the recognition, the relief, the joy of seeing her not just present but clearly thriving. President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa approached with his wife, Dr. Chepo Motsepe, both beaming with genuine warmth. "Your Royal Highness," the president said, bowing slightly, "may I say how wonderful it is to see you looking so well. Your courage during your illness has been an inspiration to people far beyond Britain's borders." Catherine felt a flush of emotion at his words, but she managed to respond with the grace that had always come naturally to her. "Thank you so much for your kindness, Mr. President. I'm honored to be here tonight, and I'm looking forward to celebrating the friendship between our nations." As they moved through the receiving line, Catherine found herself settling into the rhythms of formal royal engagement that she had thought might feel foreign after so many months away. But instead of awkwardness, there was only a sense of homecoming. Each handshake, each exchange of pleasantries, each moment of diplomatic conversation felt like reclaiming a piece of herself that she had feared might be lost forever. The dinner itself was a masterpiece of royal hospitality. The menu featured the finest British ingredients, prepared by the palace's renowned chefs: Scottish salmon, Welsh lamb, English strawberries, each course designed to showcase the country's culinary heritage. Catherine found herself genuinely enjoying the conversations around her, engaging with a South African trade minister about sustainable development, discussing education policy with a university chancellor, listening to a renowned artist describe his latest exhibition. But it was the moment when King Charles rose to give his formal toast that the evening truly became historic. The room fell silent as he began to speak about the ties between Britain and South Africa. about shared challenges and common hopes for the future. Then, his voice taking on a more personal tone, he turned toward Catherine. This evening is made even more special by the presence of my daughter-in-law, the Princess of Wales, he said, his words carrying across the quiet room. Her grace and strength during a challenging period have reminded us all of the values that unite our family and our nation. Resilience, dignity, and an unwavering commitment to service. Catherine, your return to us is a gift, and wearing that magnificent tiara tonight, you honor both its history and its future. The applause that followed was unlike anything Catherine had experienced in her royal career. It wasn't the polite clapping that usually accompanied royal events. This was sustained, heartfelt, filled with genuine emotion and relief. She felt tears prick at her eyes but maintained her composure, nodding graciously to acknowledge the tribute. When she rose to respond, the room fell absolutely silent. This hadn't been planned. Royal protocol didn't typically call for the Princess of Wales to give remarks at state dinners. But something about the moment, about the weight of the tiara on her head and the faces looking up at her with such warmth and expectation, made her feel that words were needed. Your Majesty, Mr. President, distinguished guests, she began, her voice clear and steady. I want to thank you for the extraordinary kindness you have shown me and my family during the past year. Your letters, your prayers, your patience with my absence from duties, all of it has meant more than I can adequately express. She paused, glancing at William, who gave her an encouraging nod. I have learned that strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up, sometimes with help, sometimes on your own, but always with hope. Tonight, wearing this tiara that has witnessed so much history, I'm reminded that we are all part of something larger than ourselves. The crown jewels don't belong to any individual. They belong to the institution, to the nation, to the continuity of service that connects past and future. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. I have had the privilege of time to reflect on what service truly means. It's not just about attending events or cutting ribbons. Important as those things are, service is about showing up, especially when it's difficult. It's about being present for people in their moments of joy and sorrow. It's about carrying forward the best of tradition while making space for growth and change. The room was absolutely riveted now. This wasn't the standard royal remarks. This was something far more personal and powerful. I returned to my duties not unchanged, but perhaps more grateful. More aware of how precious each day is. More committed than ever to using whatever platform I have to make a difference in people's lives. She lifted her glass, the diamonds in her tiara catching the light as she moved. So tonight I toast not just the friendship between our nations, but the resilience of the human spirit, the power of community to heal and support, and the privilege we all share of serving something greater than ourselves.
The applause that greeted these words was thunderous, but more than the volume, Catherine was struck by the quality of the response. People weren't just clapping politely, they were on their feet, many wiping away tears, all of them clearly moved by her words and her presence.
As the evening wound down, Catherine found herself in conversation with a young South African woman who worked for a cancer research charity. Your Royal Highness, she said quietly, I just wanted you to know that your openness about your diagnosis has changed conversations in my community. Women who would never have sought screening are now getting the care they need because you showed them it was okay to talk about these things. Catherine felt her chest tighten with emotion. This was why the evening mattered. Why stepping back into public life was about more than personal courage or royal duty. Her experience, difficult as it had been, could serve others. The tiara on her head was beautiful, but this connection with someone whose life had been touched by her journey, this was the real crown jewel. As the last guests departed and Catherine finally made her way back to her private apartments, she felt a profound sense of completion. The woman who had entered the state dining room that evening was not the same person who had sat in her kitchen months earlier, uncertain about attending a school fair. She had been tested, had emerged stronger, and had announced her return to the world in a way that would be remembered for generations. William helped her remove the tiara, carefully placing it back in its protective case. How do you feel? He asked, studying her face for signs of fatigue. Catherine considered the question seriously. She was tired, certainly, but it was the good kind of exhaustion that comes from meaningful work well done. I feel like myself again, she said finally. Different than before, but still fundamentally me. Still the princess who wants to make a difference, who believes in the power of service, who thinks that sometimes wearing a tiara is the best way to remind people that beautiful things endure. The photographs from that evening would indeed be talked about for generations.
They captured not just a princess in diamonds and sapphires, but a woman who had faced one of life's greatest challenges and had chosen to emerge from it with grace, strength, and an even deeper commitment to the role she was born to play. The Cambridge Lover's Knot tiara had witnessed many moments of royal history, but perhaps none more moving than the night it crowned a princess who had fought her way back to the light and decided to shine brighter than ever before.
In the days that followed, letters poured into Kensington Palace from around the world. Cancer patients wrote about finding hope in her example. Young women spoke about being inspired by her strength. Parents thanked her for showing their children that even princesses face difficult times but can overcome them with courage and support.
But perhaps the most meaningful response came from a simple card that arrived 3 days later, with no return address and just a few words written in a child's careful handwriting. "Thank you for showing me that tiaras are for brave princesses too." Catherine kept that card in her private study, next to a photograph from the state dinner. In the image, she is raising her glass in that historic toast, the tiara glittering above her radiant smile, looking every inch the princess who had conquered darkness and chosen to reign in the light.
It was a reminder that sometimes the most important service we can provide is simply showing the world that even after the hardest battles, it's possible to emerge not just intact, but more beautiful than ever before.